Hello there, I'm Manila Chan. You're watching In Question, broadcasting from RT America's National News headquarters in Washington, D.C. Here are today's top stories. First, criminal and destructive. Bold words being used to describe the latest U.S. sanctions on Syria, and there could be more coming. A full report is up next. Plus, for the first time ever, artificial intelligence helped co-pilot a U.S. spy plane. So what could this mean for the future of aviation and the U.S. military? We're going to discuss it. Then Russia signs a deal with Sudan to build a naval base along the Red Sea, expanding its military reach. We'll show you that strategic area. All right, it's time to boost your news IQ. Months after announcing new sanctions against officials in Syria, the Trump administration could be poised to take more action against the Syrian government in the coming weeks. But officials from both Syria and Russia are openly warning that if the U.S. adds more sanctions to that list, it will continue to have a devastating impact on the Syrian people. RT's Rachel Blevins has been following the story. She's joining us now. So, Rachel, could we see new sanctions before Trump leaves office?
We could, and the State Department is already warning that will be the case. And we heard from the U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, who testified before Congress that measures are already being planned right now, and they are set to be announced before Biden takes office. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Your question of will there be additional designations under the Caesar Act between now and January 20th? I can't specify specifically what sanctions we'll do in the coming weeks, but we are intending to do some.
Now, these sanctions are part of the Caesar Syria Civilian Protection Act, which President Trump signed into law last year, and its goal is to push for the U.S. to enact sanctions against anyone they feel is supporting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
Well, what do we know so far about that legislation? What has it accomplished? Because clearly the envoy doesn't have any answers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this legislation was officially enacted back in June, and then the Trump administration announced another round of sanctions in September, and it's interesting here that it's called the Civilian Protection Act, and it specifically says that the goal is not to harm the Syrian people, because we heard from the foreign minister for Russia, and he said that that is exactly what the U.S. is doing with these measures right now. Take a listen to what he said earlier.
Solving problems about the country's socio-economic development, solving issues met by the Syrian people in the COVID-19 situation are hindered by criminal unilateral sanctions, which have been imposed on Syria by the United States and some of their allies.
Now, both Russia and Syria have argued that these sanctions are illegal under international law and that they are aiding the destruction of Syria overall. And we also heard from Syria's foreign minister earlier. Take a listen to what he had to say.
When we see the United States steals our oil, occupies our territories, supports non-national movements, when they illegally enter our territories, disrespecting our sovereignty, all this contradicts the United Nations organization's resolutions. And this doesn't aim to the restoration of Syria. On the contrary, this aims to the destruction of Syria.
Now, the United Nations has yet to acknowledge these claims, but it has been quick to blame the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Syria directly on the Syrian government.
So how could an incoming Biden administration impact these already current and existing tensions?
Well, it's interesting because the ultimate goal of the legislation that President Trump signed into power was to overthrow President Assad in Syria. And that's something that the Obama administration tried to accomplish. And of course, Biden was a very big part of that administration, and he was a big supporter of their program in which they were arming and training what they referred to as moderate rebels. Now, we now know that that program was a disaster, but it's created a lot of concerns and speculation for exactly what Biden's policy would look like in Syria, and if his administration would go so far to try to overthrow Assad that they would end up in a direct conflict with Russia.
Yeah, we have no idea where they're going to go because we know the Biden administration hasn't said hardly anything about foreign policy. Rachel Blevins, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Earlier this week, the Department of Defense successfully executed the stuff of science fiction movies. The U.S. Air Force flew a U-2 spy plane in California with AI as the co-pilot. In an exclusive Popular Mechanics interview, Dr. Will Roper, the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, detailed this historic test flight. So what does this mean for the future of warfare? For that, we will turn to former Pentagon official Mike Maloof. So Mike, they are calling this R2 AI the co-pilot. But really, the AI was the mission commander. It was this artificial intelligence that controlled a U.S. military system all on its own. Does this sort of full trust in technology concern you at all going forward for real-life combat scenarios?
Oh, I think it does. And it's also something that could be knocked out by an adversary with high-energy weapons. So, and now the AI, as reported, was designed to assist the pilot on some other activities, but the pilot, for some unknown reason, didn't have full control over that AI's activities. So that's troubling. So, and I think that if you got to have the human factor in there, you got to be able to have an override capability at any time. Yeah. And Mike, if you don't have it, it's going to be a disaster.
On that note, the U-2 Dragon Lady plane completed this mock sortie mission over Beale AFB. It searched for what they called enemy launchers, while the human pilot was looking for threatening aircraft. Currently, as you mentioned, there is no pilot override, so the R2 really makes the final call on hunting missiles versus acting in self-protection. That sounds kind of scary to me. As we have seen in those two downed Boeing MAX jets, those civilian passenger jets last year, do you think it's wise to remove the human decision-making at this point?
No, absolutely not. You got to have it. You got to have the override. And as you point out with the MAX aircraft, if the pilot knew how to do it and had the proper training, that he would have been able to save those hundreds and hundreds of lives on those two separate occasions. So I think that you got to continue to have that human factor engaged here. And if you go, you cannot. Technology is designed to assist us. It's not designed to substitute for us or control us. And we're basically putting the technology in a position of controlling us. And that's where things go wrong. And if people rely on that solely, they don't know what the alternatives will be or have that override capability.
And the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, recently declared publicly that China was the greatest threat to our national security. He went on to say Beijing intends to dominate the planet economically, militarily, technologically, and China has publicly vowed to achieve AI dominance by the year of 2030. They're already #2, Mike, only behind us here in the U.S. in R&D, research and development, but are trending to overtake the U.S. in this sector in just the coming years. So do you think the DoD will need to kind of reconsider and reassess how they're spending our increasing military budgets?
Well, it's going to have to be reoriented, just like we saw that in the latest episodes of alleged hacking into our national security departments recently, that we've got to reorient our priorities, cyber in terms of cyber protection, and we also need to be able to have the ability to direct AI. We have it now to a point, but we got to stay on top of it. And of course, the Chinese have a reputation for stealing a lot of the technology, and I saw that when I was at the Defense Department. But what they can do is, once they have that fundamental basis, then they're able to progress on their own and take off independently on their own. And we're already, now you can use directed energy against AI systems if they're not hardened. And that's a coming feature, and we're going to see that with any kind of incoming robots or cruise missile attacks that we might use remotely. There would be no way to recall those cruise missiles.
Now, Mike, in terms of ethics of war, when remote-controlled drones first became commonplace just about 10 years ago, we found that the drone operators developed a new sort of PTSD, and ultimately there was still a human element to these drone strikes. But in the future, if we use fully autonomous AI, there won't be this crisis of conscience anymore. How might that shape the battlefield? Will it look like the Terminator movies with ruthless machines just mass bombing everywhere?
Well, you won't have any. You won't be able to make a distinction. You're able now to recall immediately or stop an incoming, especially if you discover that the intelligence was bad and it was, and you're in the midst of, and your target is in the midst of innocent civilians. And but if you have the AI controlling everything, there's no way you're going to be able to recall that, and you're going to have, and it's going to make us have that reputation that we already have, frankly, of killing a lot of civilians and being indiscriminate about it. And even though we shouldn't even be there in the first place, parenthetically. but the point is that once you have no control over it, it takes on a whole different posture, and you become the adversary. You really are the adversary at that point, and you're not. And then you have to question, what is your motive? What's your point? And you've got to be able to have control over the technology, and that has to be dominant in all phases of your activities, particularly as you proceed with AI or as you build robots and become more sophisticated. Technology is improving and becoming more complex all the time, and you've got to be able to control that.
All right, Mike Maloof, they're making the case for the human element in the future of warfare still.
Absolutely.
Mike Maloof, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Google and Facebook are in cahoots and they're abusing power. That's essentially the message from multiple lawsuits mounting against those two tech giants. Google in particular is accused of favoritism in search results and downgrading competing websites and not giving users any choice but to use its products on devices. Meantime, Facebook is accused of monopolizing the social media networking space. So both companies deny those charges in these cases and plan to challenge those in court. Here's RT's Donald Corder now with that story.
Google's staring down the battle of a lawsuit filed on Wednesday by a federal court in Texas. It's backed by 10 states who are crying foul on the tech giant's apparent anti-competitive practices.
Google is a $1 trillion monopoly, going so far as to induce senior Facebook executives to agree to a contractual scheme that undermines the heart of competitive process. Google is essentially trading on insider information by acting as the pitcher, catcher, batter, and umpire, all at the same time. This is anti-market and illegal.
The plaintiffs are claiming Google's formed a monopoly around the means of online advertisement and that it's in cahoots with Facebook, which is manipulating the ad market in exchange for favors. Google says the connection is a load of baloney, but Zuckerberg's already taken flack for his company's buy or bury competition tactics. Facebook's got another lawsuit to deal with from the Federal Trade Commission.
Facebook has maintained its monopoly position by buying up companies that present competitive threats and by imposing restrictive policies that unjustifiably hinder actual or potential rivals that Facebook does not or cannot acquire.
And that's just the tip of the big tech lawsuit iceberg. In October, Google had yet another legal battle on its hands, once again accused of monopolist practices.
Today, millions of Americans rely on the internet and online platforms for their daily lives. Competition in this industry is vitally important, which is why today's challenge against Google for violating antitrust laws is a monumental case both for the Department of Justice and for the American people.
Across the Atlantic, Europe's waging its own war on tech giant rule breakers.
If a gatekeeper breaks the rules, we can impose fines. If it's done several times, repeatedly, we can also impose structural remedies, divestiture, that sort of things.
Tech giants' roots go deep into the everyday lives of millions of people around the world. It would be hard to imagine life without them. But with legal battles becoming more commonplace than ever, it might be important to remember that the bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Here are the latest COVID-19 numbers worldwide. Those cases now over 75 million, with more than 1.6 million reported deaths. The U.S. is still leading the way with the most confirmed cases, followed by India and then Brazil. This country now has had more than 17 million cases and topping 311,000 reported deaths. And Vice President Mike Pence and his wife have now received the COVID-19 vaccine in a live televised event. Pence has been supporting the vaccine from the start, touring the production facility this week and highlighting the safety and efficacy of these shots.
Under Operation Warp Speed, we are poised to have vaccine for 20 million Americans before the end of December. It is truly a medical miracle.
And Russia signed a deal with Sudan to build a naval base along the Red Sea. Could this move provide Moscow with a key to the African continent? Then later at the Sports HQ, Regina Ham shares the latest action from the first women's skiing event of the season. And remember to keep up with all the latest news and anything you might have missed. Download the Portable TV app so you can watch us 24/7. We'll be right back. As of today, 28,000 new coronavirus cases have been confirmed in Russia, bringing the total number of infections in that country to almost 3 million. Meantime, the rollout of the Sputnik vaccine is almost now into week 3. Journalists and transport workers in the capital will be among the next in line to get the shot. Here's RT's Roman Kosarev with the story.
Number of COVID cases here in the Russian capital remains very high. However, a group of scientists from the St. Petersburg State University announced that the pandemic already peaked in the Russian capital this week. Now, they supported the claim with their own mathematical model created to predict the spread of COVID-19. The situation in St. Petersburg remains alarmingly tense. According to local health officials, only 4% of hospital beds that were earmarked for COVID-19 patients remain vacant, and that means that the hospitals are almost filled to capacity. Now, the situation is certainly different throughout the country. President Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, said earlier that at the moment there are no plans for a complete lockdown in Russia. While the head of state himself, he admits to country having some issues with the pandemic, but everything is under control. Let's have a listen.
No healthcare system in any country was prepared for it. Our system proved to be more or less efficient. We are aware of issues that we've had, and we are dealing with them. The pandemic required closing down some facilities and production. Unemployment has been on the rise, and incomes unfortunately have been going down. This is not just empty talk. We know how to make it better. Russia was the first country in the world to come up with and start producing its own vaccine. It's 95% effective. Not a single serious case of side effects. Foreign colleagues are ready to work with us.
Now, the Russian president also announced earlier that in addition to Sputnik V and Epivac Corona, other COVID vaccines are now in development. Meanwhile, Russia is now into week 2, where people can get inoculated against coronavirus. And speaking about Moscow in particular, so far more than 15,000 people were vaccinated at one of 70 dedicated places in the Russian capital. Mayor of the city, Sergei Sobyanin, said that 1 million more citizens may get their COVID shield starting on Monday, December 21st. Now, inoculation is currently limited to people in the 18 to 60 age group, and those people who are older will also get their vaccine. However, that will happen a little bit later.
In the near future, Russia will have a naval base in Sudan, the first on the shores of the Red Sea. The strategic move is going to allow Russia to gain control over the route through the Suez Canal, which carries about 10% of the world's sea traffic. That move is also going to allow Russia's Navy to station military staff and equipment there. RT's Yulia Shapovalova has more from Moscow.
What was once a fishing village just a few miles north of the port of Sudan, this area is about to get a military makeover. The currently abandoned site will soon house a Russian naval logistics center for the next 25 years at least. Less than 200 miles from the Saudi Arabian coast, it will be situated almost exactly halfway down the Red Sea shoreline between the Suez Canal in the north and the Gulf of Aden to the south. The strategic importance of the location is hard to overestimate. It lies along the world's main oil artery. Around 20,000 tankers pass through the Red Sea every year, and Russia plays a part in ensuring their safe passage, repelling pirates off the African coast. This base should make that task a lot easier. Countries including the US, China, France and Japan also have overseas bases in nearby Djibouti at the mouth of the Red Sea. Plans are for Russia to be able to deploy up to 4 warships in Sudan, including nuclear-powered vessels, as well as bringing in ammunition, equipment and other hardware as necessary. At the same time, there will be a maximum 300 Russian military and civilian personnel at the naval facility, making it significantly smaller than Russia's only other foreign naval base in Tartus in Syria. The agreement between Sudan and Russia says the new base will be to maintain peace and stability in the region, used only for defensive purposes and not for actions directed against other states. The idea was first put to President Putin by the now former Sudanese leader Omar al-Bashir. Negotiations ran on for several years, and even though there was a power transfer in Sudan in 2019, the development of ties with Russia was maintained. Even so, Russian experts questioned the high cost of setting up a fully fledged military base and voiced concerns over Sudan's political stability, but the opportunity to shore up Russia's presence in the region won through, and the chance to balance up and challenge US dominance in the area as well. Other military experts point also to NATO edging towards Russia's borders by deploying missile defense systems in Eastern Europe and by repeatedly casting Russia as the main threat to its member countries. It's all added weight to the decision to establish a Russian base in Sudan. As for local benefits, the new military facility is hoped to help grow nearby infrastructure and attract investment for support services. Yulia Shapovalova, RT.
And over in Iran, images have emerged showing what appears to be construction on a site at one of its underground nuclear facilities. This development comes amid tensions with the U.S. over its nuclear programs. The reason behind that construction is still unclear. However, Iran is not making any public acknowledgement of construction at any nuclear sites. And Brexit talks made some headway today, but still falls short of any deal. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said substantial progress was made in the latest round of talks with the UK, but warned that there are still big differences that remain to be bridged. Her statement came shortly after having spoken with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, with Johnson saying this.
Our door is open. We'll keep talking, but I have to say that things are looking difficult, and there's a gap that needs to be bridged.
And a French court has convicted an Islamic State operative for an attempted train attack. 5 years ago, that was thwarted by 3 American passengers, if you can recall. Moroccan-born Ayoub El-Khazani was sentenced to life in prison with 22 years guaranteed behind bars. 3 others were also convicted of complicity, with sentences ranging from 7 to 27 years. On August 21st of 2015, El-Khazani boarded the Paris-bound train carrying an arsenal of weapons.
Главное, подъем. Прошел контакт подъема. Двигатели центрального и боковых блоков вышли на режим главной ступени. 10 секунд. Параметры системы управления ракеты-носителя в норме. 20 секунд.
That was the Russian Soyuz rocket that launched today, carrying dozens of broadband satellites into space. That Soyuz 2.1B rocket blasted off with 36 OneWeb satellites. OneWeb is a British firm that recently survived bankruptcy, and OneWeb hopes to be a major competitor to SpaceX's Starlink network. Let's head over to Regina Ham at the Sports HQ. Regina, it was a beautiful day for some skiing over in France.
It was. It's that time of year, isn't it? Winter sports is upon us. And what a better way than seeing the ladies back in action at the first Women's World Cup downhill of the season. Current champ Swiss skier Corinne Sutter doing what she does best, winning. Sutter is looking to defend her 2019 title in the mountains of France. She's flying at 68 miles per hour, and her splits clearly reflect it, 0.61, 0.28 respectively. If you're counting, she has 5 of those coming into the final stretch. Italian Sofia Goggia currently sitting in first, but Sutter edges her out by 0.11 seconds to take the first place spot. But American Breezy Johnson, aptly named for how fast she's flying, could not manage a negative split all race. She finished third with 1 minute and 43.1 seconds. Sutter is now the first skier to win both the downhill and the Super G since American Lindsey Vonn in 2015. But a scary moment as well during the event. Austrian Nicole Schmidhofer, at the end of her run, going 62 miles an hour, lost control after that jump and ended up veering off course through the safety netting. The 31-year-old landed out in terrain, out of the view of cameras, and emergency crews raced to her attention. According to her coach, she likely ruptured the ligaments in her left knee and was taken to a clinic in Innsbruck for further examination. Thankfully, she was conscious and responsive and was taken off the mountain 15 minutes later. That is just shocking, and we send best wishes to her.
Absolutely. All right, thank you for that, Regina. That's going to do it for us right now. Make sure you keep up with everything in question at all times by downloading the Portable TV app so you can watch us 24/7. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Manila Chan. Thanks for watching. See you soon.